This is Cashflow Ninja. I'm MC Lobster, and thank you so much for joining me in another episode of the Cashflow Ninja. Just a reminder that all of our past episodes, along with our community resources, are all available at cashflowninja.com. There's also links to my other podcast, Cashflow Investing Secrets, where I share insights, lessons, and concepts that I've learned from interviewing over 600 Cashflow Ninjas and studying the ultra wealthy for over 2 decades. You know, one of the things that I've seen and learned is that the investors and entrepreneurs and business owners, the decisions that they make are only as good as the data that they have access to. You have access to really bad data, you can make some really bad decisions. You have access to great data, and the decisions that you make are much, much better. My friend Dave Stech, a very, very wealthy individual, multimillionaire. He lives in Puerto Rico, and him and his family office spend a very high six-figure number every year just to get access to the best data available when it comes to real estate. And that has allowed Dave to make calls that has been so accurate, you would almost think he has a crystal ball. So just to give you some info of some of the calls that Dave Stech has made. So in 2005, he spoke at Harvard and he predicted the real estate crash in 2007. He also then predicted that Las Vegas would be the #1 buy market in the United States, and he did that in 2008. And he again predicted that in 2012, real estate prices would take off, and he did that in 2011 because he looked at the data. And he also predicted a recession in 2020, last year, and this was, of course, before COVID. I had a conversation with Dave, and Dave is going to host actually a webinar for our community and for all of our Cashflow Ninja viewers and listeners there. You know, we don't have access to individuals like this all the time. This is a guy that said, MC, I will come and do a webinar with you and share this with your community, because the information that he will share in there is pretty powerful. Because in this webinar, Dave is going to share, based on the data that he has available, what's coming next in real estate, what you should do about it, and how you can avoid and or capitalize on what's coming down the line. So this is a live webinar, by the way. We're doing this on September 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can sign up for this webinar at cashflowninja.com/SOTU, SOTU. It stands for State of the Union. That's cashflowninja.com/SOTU, SOTU. It'll be live, which means you will get access to this presentation where he shares the data on what's coming next. And also you get to ask questions. We don't have access to individuals like this all the time. So I would highly recommend you jump on this webinar with my friend Dave Stech. I've learned a lot from him. I continue to learn a lot from him. Had a great conversation with him the other day. And I would highly recommend you join us on that webinar. That's September 1st at 8 Eastern Standard Time in the US. I know we have international listeners. You can sign up and then also get access to the replay. And again, this is September 1st, cashflowninja.com/SOTU, SOTU. In today's episode, I'm going to share an interview that I did in 2016 with Mr. G. Edward Griffin. Mr. G. Edward Griffin is pretty well known in the real estate investment circles, in the investment circles. He wrote the book The Creature from Jekyll Island, where he shared and basically lifted the curtain on how the Federal Reserve bank was created in the United States, who was behind it, and also in that book he shares really what money is, how money operates and works, how the international global monetary system works and financial system works. It's eerie now rereading parts of the book where the message in that book basically is the name of the game is bailout, right? So, and that's what we're seeing right now. That's what we saw in 2007, 2008. So, Mr. G. Edward Griffin is a national treasure. He's been doing a ton of research in many, many different niches. In this interview that I conducted in 2016, he talks about the invisible battle that's been going on for centuries and is at the core of basically everything that's going on. And I am republishing this episode because I think that it's very important for everyone to understand what is happening right now. Is I think if you take the onion and you peel away all of the you peel away the onion, you'll see at the core of this is this exact same battle, this invisible battle that's been around in society. Everybody knows it exists, and it's now really coming to the surface. And this battle is the battle between individualism and collectivism, as Mr. G. Edward Griffin calls it. Individualism versus collectivism. Now, individualism obviously is focused on the individual and the individual's right to pursue its sole purpose and its purpose, right? The individual's right to self-reliance, taking care of himself, his family, his community, the individual's right to producing and creating value for others, and then also exchanging value freely in the marketplace with other individuals. So individualism is obviously at the core of a free society and is what freedom is based on. And then on the other hand, we have collectivism, which we know them by very, very different names. They are camouflaged. They are, they are hidden behind very, very nice and well-crafted and well-tailored language. But essentially what collectivism comes down to is socialism, communism, fascism, and so forth. So in this interview, which I conducted in 2016 with Mr. G. Edward Griffin, he dives into this invisible battle, which I think would be extremely valuable to our listeners and our viewers. So that's why I'm republishing it. I would also encourage listeners and viewers to look at some of the other works that Mr. G. Edward Griffin has done regarding this. He did a documentary. This was in 1969, I believe, in the 60s. It's also available on YouTube, on other video platforms, where he basically goes into the communist conspiracy and the communist global conspiracy. He also has an interview online with Soviet defector Yuri Bezmenov, talking about this exact same topic. And this is the invisible battle that has been raging for centuries, and it's now coming to the surface. So I think it's very important for folks that want to protect themselves, want to protect their families, and that really, really value freedom and individual freedom to be cognizant of this. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Mr. G. Edward Griffin. Mr. Griffin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, MC. Glad to be here.
Now, Mr. Griffin, it's an honor to have you back on the show. And in our previous conversation, we looked at central banking and this massive creature that was born on Jekyll Island. And today I'm really excited to talk about a very, very important topic with you. Individualism versus collectivism, of course, two very opposite fundamental philosophical poles. And these are, of course, concepts that have been misrepresented of exactly what it is and what these philosophical views and approaches are to living our lives and organizing our environment and society. And of course, there's a great work done by government schools and educational institutions funded by the government to program and brainwash us from a very young age. I believe it was Vladimir Lenin that said, give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I've sown will never be uprooted. So it's really not a surprise in my experience that there's such a misunderstanding of these concepts. Now, let's start with freedom. And what is your idea of freedom, and what does freedom mean to you?
Well, that's a good place to start because, you mentioned the phrase collectivism versus individualism, and I had a little flashback many, many years ago. The first time I came across those words, I thought, I don't know what that is, but it sounds too boring that I don't think I care to know. And I was just wondering if anyone listening to this program had a similar reaction. And I just want to say up front, as like a little teaser, that once you get into this topic of collectivism versus individualism, it is one of the most exciting and stimulating concepts that can go through your mind because it touches on literally everything that's important to us in our lives. It makes a difference between whether we will be encouraged or even allowed to do the things that we cherish, or whether we will be totally regulated in everything we do and everything we even think by some higher authority. So it's at that level, and if that doesn't excite you, especially in today's world where our freedom to choose what we do and even what we think is being constantly shrunk, if that doesn't excite you, I don't know what would. So anyway, I'm delighted to speak on that topic, but yeah, I think you're wanting to start on the concept of freedom is a good place to start because at least that word is familiar to us. So sure, everybody wants freedom, don't they? They speak, give us freedom and freedom to do this and freedom to do that. And even despots talk about freedom. I think that some of the most tyrannical moves that have ever been made in history, in modern history anyway, have been done in the name of bringing freedom to people. We're sending our military, for example, around the world. Why? And we don't say we're there to invade those countries and to bring about regime change. We say we're there so that the people can be free there. And of course, that never happens. After the invasion and after the war, there's a new dictator that goes into place, and the people were even less free than before we went there to bring freedom to them. We're supposed to bring democracy to them, and we wind up where they have less freedom and less voice in their own affairs than they ever had before. So freedom, though, is a popular word, and everybody's for freedom, but how many people can define what freedom is? I venture to say not many. Most people, I have found, think that freedom is simply not being in jail. Anything outside of the jail, it means you're free. Well, that's not my definition of freedom. And so what is my definition of freedom? I'll cut to the chase on this, and we can come back in a moment and do some of the logic behind it and some of the historical precedents to defend that point of view. But to me, freedom is merely the ability to do anything you want to do, provided that it does not take away or endanger the life, liberty, or property of another person. Now, that's a very specific definition, and I think if you follow this through and think of all of the ramifications of it, it is pretty inclusive. The only time that an individual, you or I, are ethically justified in using coercion against our neighbors, the only time we can use physical force against anybody is in the defense of our life, our liberty, and our property. Now, no one would say you were ethically wrong if you used physical force, even if you had to use lethal force against somebody to defend your life. Most people would say, well, you were justified. It was self-defense. But notice the word defense. That is the only basis, in my view at least, the only basis for the use of force against another person. It's not aggressive, not to make them do something, but to prevent them from doing something. It's not to make them, send their children to school or close their shops on Sunday or, to hire certain people or to pay a minimum wage or anything. It's not the authority to make people do something, but to prevent them from injuring or taking away your life, your liberty, or your property. Now, if one follows that that rule, they basically are adhering to the concept of individualism. Because we'll get to that a little bit later on in the Creed of Freedom, but individualism is based on the defensive nature of force. It's that we cannot establish a state that is designed to force or coerce anyone to do anything except to prevent them from taking our life, liberty, and property. That was the way the United States was designed in the beginning. That's the way the Constitution of the United States was drafted, and that's the basis of the Bill of Rights. You notice the Bill of Rights, for example, they don't grant powers to the government. They deny powers to the government. They're defensive. Congress shall pass no law restricting the right of speech or freedom of assembly, the right to bear arms, and so forth. Congress shall not. People shall not. The majority shall not. It's all negative. You shall not do this because otherwise you would be endangering the life, liberty, or property of individual citizens. It's a very simple concept, but it's not taught in schools. I had to kind of discover this. Fortunately, starting in the 1960s, I became interested in these issues. I really wasn't much of a student in school, I have to tell you. I thought that the library was someplace you went because you did something wrong and you had to be punished. And it wasn't until I got out of school and began to have an interest in some of these deeper issues that I found myself going to the library. My gosh, going to the library and checking out a book without having to. And I became kind of hooked on the whole thing. But they don't teach this in school. And if they did, I don't think we'd have anywhere near the political and social problems we have today. Because in my view, and I'll sort of wrap this up to go on to something else, but in my view, almost all of the real troubling issues facing our country today are based on the violation of that fundamental principle that the state should use coercion only negatively, only to prevent citizens from taking away the life, liberty, or property of its citizens. And anything beyond that is not a legitimate function of the state. If we had followed that principle from the very beginning all the way to the present, I venture to say that 99% of the social and economic and political problems we now face just would not be there. So that's my definition of freedom.
The non-aggression principle plays in heavily into that definition, and I agree with you that it's simply just not taught in schools anywhere, not just in the United States, anywhere. I grew up in South Africa, and I had the similar experience than you. I was sent to the library to go do a project, and never for the fun books that I walked past that I actually wanted to read and was interested in picking up, but other ones. But looking at individualism and collectivism now, I think it's fascinating because there are just so many terms that we use to describe our political attitudes, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, progressives, left-wingers, right-wingers, now the far right and the alt-right and socialists, communists, Maoists, Trotskyites. We could go on and on, fascists, statists, Nazis, and then every year there's almost a new term. But most people really fall into two groups of people that you talk about, those that believe in individualism and those that believe in collectivism. What is your definition of individualism? I know you touched a little bit on it, and then also collectivism.
Well, those, as you just said, are the only reasonable words to use in discussing the debate in the Western world about what political beliefs you have.
CAMAPLAN is one of the leaders for personalized tax-deferred and tax-free IRA planning. CAMAPLAN's team can assist you to take control of your retirement funds and financial future through self-directed investing. They offer support to clients throughout the entire process, from opening your first account to making your first purchase to self-managing your assets. CAMAPLAN works with a growing network of investment providers in all asset categories and offer free investor education through classes, events, and webinars with over 15 years of leadership and self-directed retirement investing. CAMAPLAN will help you unlock a convenient and safe way to manage your retirement investments and discover financial freedom beyond traditional investments, beyond Wall Street, and go from forever taxed to never taxed. Start to take control over your retirement funds and financial future today by visiting cashflowninja.com/CAMAPLAN.
As you so correctly stated, all these other terms, left, right, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, all these words are meaningless because once you peel off the labels and look underneath and start looking at the elements of the underlying ideology, they all fall into two groups, either collectivist on the one side or individualist on the other side. So really we should abandon all those other words with all of the emotional garbage that is attached to them and just look at the underlying principles of collectivism versus individualism. And this is something that's not taught either. I more or less had to discover these principles by just reading a lot of books. And this was very heavily discussed 80 years ago, 100 years ago, 120 years ago. The treatises on political philosophy use these words over and over again, collectivism, individualism, and they're almost not used at all anymore in the modern vernacular. And we're trying to put them back into the vocabulary because they are so important. And as I went through these things, I discovered by reading all the works of the great collectivists such as, Karl Marx and Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, and reading Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler and Mao Zedong's little red book and all the writings of Stalin and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and all of the boys, I discovered that there were certain recurring themes that came up over and over again that were common to them all. And I made a little list of them, and I found that basically there were 8 common themes. There were more actually in total, but the 8 at the top of the list were probably the most important. And if we understood those 8, we would know all there is to know. What an absurd statement that is, but I think it's true. We would know all there is to know about the debate between collectivism and individualism, which would cover just about all of the debate in the Western world. So what are those 8? I don't know how much time we have or how deeply you want to go into it, but the first one on the list has to do with what are the origins of human rights. This may not sound like it's very important. Who cares what the origins are, people would say, as long as you've got them, right? We all have human rights. Well, maybe yes and maybe no. The individualist believes that rights come with the individual. They come with him. They're part of him. He's born with them. Some would say they are God-given. They're intrinsic. They're inalienable. Different words are used to describe this concept. The idea that rights are hardware. They come with the person. The collectivist says, no. Rights are software. They have to be added to the person, and they come from the state. The collectivist believes that the state is the source of authority, and the state grants you your rights. And that you find that in all of the major political documents of the collectivist nations of the world. It's in the Communist Manifesto. It's in the Soviet Constitution. You go to the United Nations and look at their draft covenant on human rights, and you find it there. The UN says that, and this is a direct quote, it says all rights belong to the state. Their origin is from the state. And the purpose of the state is to grant rights to individuals. Well, that is collectivism. Now, the problem with that is that if the state has the power to grant rights, it also has the power to take them away.
Right.
And that is a condition that most people would not, tolerate. And yet they do accept it when they get tricked into thinking that the state has the authority to grant rights. So that's a very important distinction there. It may not sound like much, but if you look at all of the totalitarian systems of the modern world, in their constitutions, it's always very clear that the state is the source of rights. And you better be good boys and girls, because if you misbehave and if the political leaders don't like you, they're going to take away your rights. You won't have the right to speak freely or to travel or to practice a religion of your choice or any of the things that we like to think are our rights. So that's just one part. I think the second one perhaps is more dramatic because you can see it, you visualize it, and that is the supremacy of the individual is how I phrase it. The collectivists believe that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. Now, that is a principle that I was taught in school, and at the time it made a lot of sense to me. I thought, well, what's wrong with that? The greater good of the greater number. Isn't that democracy? And isn't democracy good? Of course, we want the greater good for the greater number. But the problem is that when you look at the group and you really analyze what it is, you come to the amazing conclusion that it doesn't exist. Amazing thought. The group does not even exist. It's an abstraction in the mind. It's a mathematical concept. You can't touch the group. You can't see a group. All you can touch or see are individuals. And we say that mathematically, more than 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, that is the group. But the essence of it is really the individual. And the group itself is merely an abstraction, like the word forest. There's no such thing as forest. There are only trees. You can't cut down a forest, but you can't cut down individual trees. And so applying that to our social relationships, if we assume that the group, which does not even exist, has rights that are above the rights of individuals who do exist, well, you've made a terrible blunder, because you've set in motion a concept that allows the demagogues, the tyrants, to move to the top, and they say, we represent the group. We speak for the group. We are the party of the people. We are the leaders of the people, and so forth, or whatever language they want to use. And so they become absolute dictators, claiming that they represent the group, which doesn't even exist. And so what it turns out to be is another dictatorship, but using word trickery and mental trickery to think that, the group is supreme and therefore we have to be content. We have to be willing to sacrifice an individual or 10 individuals or thousands of individuals, if not even 1 million individuals, if it's for the greater good of society. And when you think about it, it's a very, very bad principle, because take a lynch mob, for example. That's a perfect example of democracy, pure democracy in action. There's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. Right. So that makes, you stop and think, well, wait a minute. Yeah, that's not, the majority maybe should not always rule. And that, of course, it takes us to an understanding of the word, the republic, the classical definition of the word republic, as it was used back at the time that our Constitution here in the United States was drafted. The word republic meant something. It doesn't anymore, because look, we have the Republic of China. Every tin-horn dictatorship in the world calls itself a republic, and we don't understand what the word republic used to mean. Well, it used to mean that it was majority rule, but with limits on the majority. What limits? Well, those are the limits that were written into a constitution or a founding document. The parts that say, you shall not. The parts that say, Congress shall not pass a law, restricting the right of an individual to practice his religion, an individual to have freedom of speech, an individual to hold a weapon to defend himself. An individual of one is supreme against the whole nation, according to a republic, if we're talking about the defense of life, liberty, and property of that individual. And so that was the classic definition of a republic. It was simply meant a democracy with limits on the majority, so that the majority, the passion and the greed of the majority, could not deny the human rights of the individual. even an individual or group of one. A very important definition, again, an important concept, and it's at the heart of the difference between individualism and collectivism.
Benjamin Franklin said a democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. But in a republic, the sheep would have a gun.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's true. The sheep would be defended by the laws of a republic. Now, if the wolves had the gun, if we had one wolf and two sheep, if the wolf had the gun, the sheep were out of luck too,
Yeah, exactly.
So now we're back to the Second Amendment, Thou shalt not take away the right of the individual to defend himself with a firearm. That's the Second Amendment. Not in those words, but it's a restriction that the state cannot take away the right of an individual to possess a weapon to defend himself. And so we're back to the principle of the non-aggressive principle.
Right.
Okay, I'm moving through this pretty fast, but I just want to drop a flavor of this as we go along. But these are concepts that are not taught in school, but you will find them in the classic treatises on liberty and freedom that were popularly read 80 to 100 years ago. Right. Then, okay, we move to number 3, which is what I just call freedom of choice. An important distinction between a collectivist and an individualist is that individualists believe in freedom. They really do. They believe that you should have freedom to choose everything except to take away the life, liberty, and property of your citizen, of your neighbor, of other citizens. Freedom to do anything else. But collectivists said, no, freedom won't work. Freedom is okay. You should have your freedom to choose what color socks you want to put on in the morning. But beyond that, that has to be decided for you by wise people, because otherwise you're apt to make a wrong choice. And they're going to force you to do what is right for you. The minority, the elite, the wise ones, the educated ones, the ones with political power will make these decisions for you. And you must follow those decisions or else you go to prison. I think a classic example that always bugs me is I think about seatbelt laws. Classic example. The collectivist says, you ought to wear seatbelts. They're good for you. If you don't wear your seatbelt, you could kill yourself or get badly damaged. So that being the case, we're going to pass a law and make you dummy, make you wear your seatbelt whether you want to or not. Otherwise, we're going to throw you in prison. It reminds me of my friend. I have a good friend. He's a very good friend, but we don't agree on this. Every time he sees something he doesn't like if somebody tosses a cigarette butt out the window of a car, I don't like it either, just as much as he doesn't like it. But he says there ought to be a law.
I cringe when I hear that.
Yeah, there ought to be a law. He's going to make a law on everything, and most people would say, yeah, that's right. You shouldn't do that. Let's have a law. And they don't realize that law by law, nail by nail, they're nailing their own coffin, because every day there are another 1,000 laws, and the next day another 1,000 laws. By the time you reach the end of your lifetime, there's so many laws, you're like Gulliver, all tied down with those thin strings, ropes. Right. And you wonder, what happened to my freedom? And the fact is, they voted it away because they thought these people should be put in prison if they throw a cigarette butt out the window. Anyway, that's a very important thing. And so the individualist believes, yeah, accidents are bad and seatbelts are good. You should wear your seatbelts. And I believe that I will try to convince you to do so. I will show you by good example that I wear my seatbelt. I might even contribute some money to a campaign to put on a television series to demonstrate the value of seatbelts, but I'm not going to throw you in prison because you don't do it. Mainly because I don't believe that I have the power to force you to do something, so forth. So there is a very important distinction between individualists and collectivists. I was at a conference in Florida a couple of years ago, and I came out, and I was stunned. I looked at the parking lot area, and I saw this sign in front of a handicapped parking area, and it says handicap parking only. And then the next line, violators will be fined a minimum of $500 or something like that. I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to pass a law to make sure that people don't park in a parking area that is reserved for handicapped people. Of course, that's nice that you do that, but you're going to throw people in prison for it? So anyway, I took a picture of the sign, and I came back home, and I used photo paint, or that's the Corel version of Photoshop, and I wiped out the $500 fine part, and I put words in that said, "Thank you very much," or something, just thank you. And I put the two signs side by side. And I said, which city would you rather live in? The one with this sign or the one with that other sign? And, of course, that is, another way of looking at it. If we want freedom, if we don't want to be coerced every time we turn around, we better be willing to grant freedom to others, even grant them to make a poor choice. As long as it doesn't threaten my life, liberty, or property, I think people should be free to make mistakes, even to do things I don't like. Even, aside from hurting my life, liberty, and property, I don't think I should have any power over them. That's the essence of freedom. You gotta, if you want to be free, you have to allow others to be free as well. Well, now we come to number 4, which is property rights. Now, this is really an area where you can get into heated discussions because a lot of people, most people in school, like myself, I was taught that property rights used to be very important in the pioneer days because, this was a very primitive society and people needed property. And anyway, there was so much of it to go around. It didn't make any difference if you owned property, but not anymore, we were told. If anybody that owns property today, they're denying somebody else from having property. And besides, you can't own property. You can't take it with you when you die. And therefore, property should not be held by individuals. It should be held collectively. There's that word again. The collective, the group, should own the property and administer it on behalf of the collective or the group. Let everybody share equally, but no private ownership.
We are living through unprecedented times, and many experts say that in the coming months and years, we're about to see some of the best real estate opportunities of our lifetime. Who's going to benefit the most from these opportunities? Those with access to capital, which is where the Real Estate Accelerator comes in. Brought to you by Good Egg Investments, the Real Estate Accelerator is an online course and mastermind that will give you everything you need to raise private capital for real estate syndications. Through building a killer brand that attracts the right investors, you'll be able to take advantage of the upcoming opportunities and scale your business. To learn more, check out cashflowninja.com/goodegg.
Well, when you follow that all the way down to the bottom of the rabbit hole, you find out it's a very bad move because property rights are human rights. I've read over and over again many treatises where some professor usually says that we must not allow property rights to override human rights. And I want to say, shout at the printed page and say, wait a minute, professor, back up a little bit. Property rights are human rights. I can assure you that no other animal has property rights, even though they have the territorial instinct. All animals want to, dominate a particular territory. It's part of the mating ritual, actually. It comes as part of our instinct. It's certainly strong in humans, but beyond the instinct side of it, if you don't own property, real estate, have the right to own it. You don't have to own it. But if you don't have the right to own real estate or own a car, own your house, own your clothes, own your food that you have in your pantry, it's yours, not somebody else's. You can give it to others if you want to, but it's yours for right now. If you don't have the right to own property, you cannot survive without assistance from someone else. And if no one else is allowed to own property except the state, that means you cannot survive without permission of the state. And that's where this always goes. If you can't have property, you are dependent for everything you do on political decisions of some ruling party. And you are now a serf. It's as simple as that. And there are other aspects to it too, and that is that the people who own property always take care of their property much more than those who don't own it. You take a look at the property that's owned by, I saw this up in Oregon a few years ago, where there are a lot of trees, in Oregon, and they were always talking about preserve the forests. And every time I saw some hillside or some mountainside that was stripped bare, I inquired and I found out it was Forest Service land, not owned by anybody, but by the state. They had stripped it down to the ground, caused erosion. It was ugly. It was that way for years. But when I saw the property that was owned by logging companies, private firms, private individuals, and when they logged off an area, they didn't do that kind of strip logging. They left trees here and there. They left planter trees. And they didn't cut deeply into the road, into the hillside with making roads and that kind of thing. They airlifted the logs out so they could maintain the soil. They did a lot of things to preserve the ecology of the land because it was their land. And here we had the bureaucrats, on the other hand, talking about environmentalism and preserving forests, but they didn't do it because it wasn't their land. All they cared about was getting their paycheck and making some kind of a quota and looking good on paper. If you go down the street and you see a lot of nice little houses with their grass cut, the trees are trimmed and the bushes are nice and trimmed, and the house is painted, and then you see right in the middle of that, there's a house that's unpainted, broken door, broken porch, weeds in the front yard. Guess which one is a rental? Right. It's that simple. So property rights are important at many levels. And it's one of the differences between individualism and collectivism is that individualists believe that property rights are important and collectivists say no, they're not important to the individual. They should be owned by the collective. So we move up to number 5. Well, this is one that is very close to my heart. It's money without coercion. As you know, I've written a book on the Federal Reserve System called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And I really got deeply into the monetary and banking system when I did the research on that. And I came out with a very, very strong preference for gold or silver or something else of tangible value backing a money supply. I think it's absolutely essential for us to be protected against the confiscation of our wealth through this process called inflation. If we have money that's not backed by something that takes human nature to produce, like gold or silver or something else, then the money supply will grow exponentially because it's so easy to make. In fact, you can just make it out of nothing, and that's what the banks do. So when the money supply expands faster than the supply of goods and services, then the value of each purchasing unit of that money goes down, 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 till finally it's worthless, and that's what we call inflation. And it's a process by which our wealth is completely stolen from us by the banks and by the governments. So I think that all money should have something of intrinsic value backing it, which limits its supply because it takes effort to produce it. Now, that's what I believe. But I also believe in freedom of choice, if you remember. So I am not the kind of a person that says that I'm going to pass a law and make everybody use the kind of money that I think is valuable or more valuable. So how do you reconcile those 2 points of view? And it's very simple. You just give people freedom of choice to use any money they wish. Now, if the particular money of the nation in which they live is backed by gold or silver, I can assure you most people are going to want to use it. If it's just fiat money and the banks make it out of nothing and it's losing value every day, some people will still use it as long as they can turn it over and spend it fairly quickly before it loses too much value. But others who are wanting to save money for the long term, let's say for their retirement, they're looking ahead and they're saying, golly, if I save this money, it's going to be worthless by the time I retire. So they will look for something else. Maybe they'll go to some other currency from some other country, or maybe they'll even go to a privately issued currency, and that happens a lot in history. Well, that is why countries that create fiat money, which is worthless money in terms of their intrinsic value, they all pass laws called legal tender laws. And when you analyze what that means, that simply means that you no longer have the freedom to use any money except the one that the nation decrees is your money. You can't use any other money. It's illegal. There again, they'll throw you in jail if you don't use their worthless money. So the solution, therefore, is to get rid of all legal tender laws and allow people the freedom to use whichever money they wish. Under those conditions, you're not decreeing which one they should use. They can use any one they wish. But under those conditions, trial and error and historical record will show which money is more valuable than the other. And it won't take long before everybody is using pretty much the same currency because it has proven itself to be the most reliable. So you don't have to decree which money people will use. They will use the best one for them. And I'm confident that after a little while, maybe 10 years or so, everybody will go back to using money that's backed by gold and silver. But if not, well, that's their choice. So again, the principle is freedom of choice as applied to money. And that is the fifth difference between collectivism and individualism, is that collectivists believe that you should not have choice in this. You must use the state's money. And that's a good reason, because that's how the state bribes everybody into subjection. You know, that's how they pay for all the welfare. It's how they keep everybody on the dole so that they vote the way they think they have to vote in order to keep the money coming from the government. And they couldn't do that if they couldn't create money out of nothing. If they had to raise it in the form of taxes, nobody would pay the taxes. It'd be too much. But if they raise it from inflation, there's no limit. They can raise all of it. They can take away everything you have in the way of purchasing power through inflation, and you have no control over it. So individualists believe in money without coercion, freedom to choose money, and the collectivists believe in money that you must use that is issued by the state.
And it's very important also to point out that money was not a creation of government. That's a creation from the free market. People was a medium of exchange since for a very, very long time, ages ago. It's a way to exchange value between people of their production, of their goods and services, and not from the state at all. And the other point that I also want to add is you'd mentioned the social welfare state depends on this fiat money and the creation of money, and it also supports the warfare state.
Yeah, absolutely. If people knew what they were paying for wars, there would be a tax rebellion on their hands. But they don't know. All they know is that the cost of bread keeps going up. And they think, my goodness gracious, why is this bread going up? They don't realize that that is a hidden tax for the wars we're fighting and for the welfare and for all the graft and the payola, and the crony socialism that they've got out there. They're paying for it through a tax, a hidden tax called inflation.
Right.
Equality under law is the sixth point I discovered. Everybody talks about equality under law. Everybody's for equality under law. That's what they say. But when you look at what they vote for in Congress, or what the people they vote for, if you're a voter, nobody really believes in that, because I'm going to guess that over 90% of the laws on the books in America and around the world are laws which are deliberately designed to apply unequally between one class of citizens or one group to another one. Take the income tax, for example. Does everybody pay the same income tax? Of course not. There are thousands and thousands of pages of rules and regulations in the tax books, all of which are designed to give one group an advantage over another group through deductions, special exemptions, rebates, all of this kind of stuff, so that you wind up taking advantage of everyone else. That's how these laws get written. Lobbyists and people of great influence will go to their congressman and say, look, I'm going to give you a nice contribution for your campaign if you just would consider putting this feature into the tax law. Why? Because it would help me against my competition. It'll make money for me. That's why. And so another law or another rule gets put into the tax laws. And we wonder what happened. Well, that's all because the tax laws are designed to apply unequally to various groups. And you look everywhere else. We've got laws that give people advantages in school. We have to hire some people over others based on their ethnicity or race or gender or something, to treat them differently than everybody else. 90%, I'm sure more than 90% of our laws are deliberately written to be unequal. And yet everybody goes around saying, yeah, I believe in equality under law. They do not. Individualists do. We do honestly believe in equality under law, but collectivists use the law to create advantage from one group over another, and it's not equal at all.
And that's where when you hear someone says fair share, oh boy, be careful then. You're dealing with a particular person, a collectivist in this case, because that's what we keep hearing, and that's the language out there right now, is fair share, fair share.
Yeah, that means you pay more than I do.
Exactly.
That's what that means.
Exactly.
Now, it might seem in your mind that it is fair. It might seem that it is fair that some people would pay more than others, but that is not equality under law. And I would rather stick with equality, which everybody understands. It's clear. But what fair means differs a lot from one person to the other. So if you're looking for law, you better have something that is clearly understood. Otherwise, someone else will interpret what the words mean, and I can assure you it won't be for your benefit.
Right. A very relative term, fair.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. What is fair would probably be best for your relatives. In that sense, it would be a relative term.
Right.
But now here's another one we just added about a year ago, and I think this is the last one. I've always had it in my notes, but I didn't think it was so important until this recent election. And I call it the great leader. And I think in this case, I would be well advised just simply to read it. It's not very long, and it'll probably allow me to cover this ground faster and probably more accurately than if I just talked about it. So here it is, number 7. It's our creed of freedom. I believe that leadership is a natural outgrowth of human dynamics and is essential for social order and large-scale tasks. However, there are 2 types of leadership. One is based on coercion and decree, found in military organizations and totalitarian political systems. The other is based on persuasion and good example, found in voluntary organizations and free political systems. We must evaluate leaders not only on their stated goals, but on which type of leadership they offer. Their goals may be admirable, but how they pursue those goals may be tyranny. All modern totalitarian systems have a great leader who claims to represent the best interests of the people, but who is, in reality, merely a dictator. Truly great political leaders do not follow that path. Okay,
Very
that's
well
it.
said.
Yeah, and we have to be careful because, modern politics is based on not who you like to vote for. You don't vote for. Most people don't vote for anybody anymore. They vote against somebody. I haven't heard in years. I haven't heard too many people say, I'm voting for such and such because I think he's the best man. Almost always I hear, well, I don't like any of them, but I'm voting for this one because he's the lesser of 2 evils, or she is the lesser of 2 evils. It's a horrible state of affairs because they're all looking for the man on the white horse. They all want somebody to say what is right and actually deliver. That's impossible in politics in the modern world. Politicians, they don't really tell you what they believe. In fact, they don't believe anything except that they have to win the election. Basically, that's what they believe in. And all of them, I don't care who they are, all of them spend a lot of money conducting polls and sampling public opinion to determine what it is the public wants to hear. And then they hire speechwriters. Some of them do. Some of them, I don't think Donald Trump, if he hired a speechwriter, he probably, the speechwriter didn't earn his pay because Trump never. But anyway,
Right.
I'll go back to the word most. Most of them hire speechwriters to write out speeches that repeat the things that the public wants to hear. Now, there is absolutely no connection in most cases between those speeches and what the politician actually believes, if anything.
There is a massive demand for affordable housing across the United States that far outpaces the current supply. More and more people will be renting in droves, and it's putting the squeeze on an already tight rental market. This provides a unique opportunity in a recession-resistant and also the highest yielding investment niche in real estate right now, mobile home parks. Four Peaks Capital Partners has been successfully investing in this proven recession-resistant sector for years, providing investors with predictable passive income and capital appreciation. Four Peaks Capital Partners offer private real estate investments for accredited investors to passively invest in this real estate niche. To learn more how to protect your investment portfolio and at the same time generate predictable income passively, visit privateincomeinvesting.com. That's privateincomeinvesting.com.
Or certainly no connection to what he's going to do once he's put into office. Then it's a whole different game. Now there's another contest to see who you have to please. And so it's a very discouraging game if you understand it. So under these conditions, it's very dangerous to find the man that stands up and says, I am the great leader. I am the one that's going to lead the nation back to to greatness or to make a change. Mr. Obama said, change. Well, we didn't get any change. We just same old policies. Just the only thing that changed was the name of the president. Now Mr. Trump is saying, make America great again. Don't know what that means, but it sounds good. But it's clear that he wants to be the great leader. And I'm not saying anything against Donald Trump now. As a matter of fact, if I had to choose between the two, if I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils, it would be who. Right. But I'm just pointing out that this principle of the great leader is something we have to be very aware of. We do not want to make our selection on the basis that so-and-so is a great leader. We want to do it on the basis that so-and-so is a person who honors the individual and that the individuals are the leaders and not the group.
And if history has taught us anything, be careful on a man with a white horse.
Lord,
when he rides in to come and rescue the day. Now, these are extremely, extremely powerful principles, and this is part of the creed of freedom for your organization that I just wanted you to talk a little bit about as well, the Freedom Force International. You guys are doing fantastic work over there. And just share a little bit with my listeners what the organization is about.
Thank you for that. The organization is designed, in fact, it was formed back in 2002. And it just is really ramping up right now. It's taken all this time to get organized, to figure out, how we should go about this and so forth. But it's really ramping up now. But in a nutshell, it's an organization that is international in scope. We have members now in, I think it's 80-some countries. And the whole purpose of the organization is to promote the concepts that we've been talking about in the Creed of Freedom. Not only to promote them, but to do what we can to make them the guiding principles of all political systems in the future. We're not expecting this to happen by the next election or anything like that. We see it as a long-term process, probably going to take a couple of generations, but we're already moving. We can see that the boat has left the dock and we're moving, and we can see the buildings begin to slowly move past as the boat moves out to sea. So we have two goals in mind. One is to promote the appreciation of the principles in the Creed of Freedom, because we think it's important that people know what they're for. It's not enough just to know what you're against. We started this discussion out earlier by saying most people think that freedom is merely not being in jail. And so they'll vote for anybody that says, yeah, vote for me. I'm the great leader. I'm the man on the white horse. We hate the other guy. And so anybody's got to be better than that. So vote for me. And so what happens? They turn out to be just as bad, if not worse, than the previous one. Why? Because people didn't know what they wanted. They know what they didn't want, but they didn't know what they wanted. They didn't know what was essential for freedom. So that's the first thing that Freedom Force is attempting to do, is to create an awareness of what is the basis of freedom, what is required for freedom to exist. And we're all on that same page. And then the next step is to a program or strategy to implement that into the political and social structure of our respective countries. It's not enough just to know about these things and